Promotion Sunday, the first Sunday of the church year. And for a good many of people in this room, the beginning of school and all of those households that are affected by the academic calendar are in great stress. For 30 years, my house has endured the stress of August. Melissa has just retired after 30 years as an elementary school teacher. And before coming here, I was driven by the academic calendar too, teaching at the School of Theology at Mercer. August at my house was stressful. But I also, living with an educator for 30 years, came to have deep appreciation for the life of the teacher and the important role that teachers play. She has given her life to being an educator. I spent 36 of my life, 36 years, either in school as a student or an employee. 4 of those years I was doing both. So I'm saying all of that up front to tell you what a big fan of education I am. I value knowledge. I appreciate education. But I also need to declare today what education cannot do. Now, education can help us think more clearly. It can help us communicate more effectively. It can help us get better jobs and make more money. Education can teach us to problem solve. Education can unleash our capacity to do more and create more and achieve more. But there are also serious limits, because education cannot teach us to do the right things. Only wisdom teaches what is right. Education has a beautiful sister. And education's beautiful sister gets so little attention this time of year or any time of year. Her name is Sophia. Sophia is the Greek word for wisdom. And while her brother, Knowledge, is getting all the attention, he gets a little press in the Princeton Review every year. We've been house hunting on every website. It tells you, it ranks the schools because it's important to know what the public schools are doing. Getting your child in the right preschool is pretty important, but few people are elbowing each other to get a good seat next to education's sister, Sophia. Education teaches children and adults to be smarter. But Sophia teaches us to be wise. My friend Don handed me a book a few weeks ago. He had just finished reading it, handed it to me. He said, "I think you'll like this." I sat down, read the first page, closed the book, ordered my own copy. I knew after the first page I wanted that in my library. Listen to how the author started this one. The book is The Road to Character by David Brooks. And this is how he opens. Recently, I've been thinking about the difference between resume virtues and eulogy virtues. The resume virtues are the ones you list on your resume, the skills you bring to the job market that contribute to external success. The eulogy virtues are deeper. They're the virtues that get talked about at your funeral. The ones that exist at the core of your being, whether you are kind, brave, honest, or faithful, what kind of relationships you formed. You see, I love education. Spent a lot of my life in education. But education is primarily about resume virtues, and church is primarily about eulogy virtues. Now, parents, I'm going to say this more directly than I often speak. I usually kind of just tiptoe close to things and let you, but I feel compelled to say this pretty directly. If you're diligent about your child's schoolwork and attendance, and haphazard about your child's active participation in Sunday school and Wednesday night, then you are contributing to raising less than a fully formed adult. The people we admire most have been shaped by both resume virtues and eulogy virtues, and church is one of the last vestiges of a place that cares about, teaches, instills the virtues of eulogy. David Brooks goes on to say this: most of us have clearer strategies for how to achieve career success than we do for how to develop a profound character. And church is one of the few places left that is given to the formation of character and wisdom. We gave Bibles to the first graders today, in part hoping they're going to read them, but also symbolizing the church's commitment to help them form in the ways of wisdom. We want them to be friends of Sophia. We want them to love sitting with Sophia every day. If we educate our children to be smart and successful while neglecting the nurture of wise character, then we have neglected part of the parental role. We must learn, but we must also learn to do something good with what we learned. Melissa and I went recently to see the new Jurassic Park movie and get scared out of our wits again. When the first Jurassic Park book came out, I was not interested at all, but there was so much buzz around the book that I finally picked it up, took it to the beach, read it on the beach trip, and was absolutely gripped by it. So when the movie came out, we were first in line. Some of you, if you can reach back that far, will remember this scene from the movie. It's the scene where John Hammond, the guy who developed Jurassic Park, the one with the white hair and beard, right? He is talking with Ian Malcolm, the character that was played by Jeff Goldblum. So it's the two of them in this conversation. And John Hammond, the rich guy who created Jurassic Park, is just so full of his accomplishments. He had brought these dinosaurs to life, and he's talking to Ian. He says to Ian, "I don't think you're giving us due credit. Our scientists have done things which nobody's done before." And Ian says, yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could that they didn't stop to think if they should. That's what happens when education rules and Sophia is not invited to the party. Education can teach us to do things that nobody's done before, but only wisdom can teach us whether or not they should be done. Our English translation of the Bible mentions smart one time. I couldn't find any place it mentioned education. But the words wise, wisdom, and wisely showed up more than 400 times. In the Old Testament, the Hebrew word is chokmah. In the New Testament Greek, the word, as I've already said, is Sophia. In both Old Testament and New Testament, those words are feminine, which I think is entirely an accident. I think we're to draw no biblical conclusions from wisdom being feminine. I mentioned last week when we were talking about 2 Samuel that the worldview of that time was that God was in complete control of all good and bad, happiness and tragedy. That was the dominant theology until the exile. Until the exile, the thinking was that God was active and present in everything that happened. And so punishment and release was the theme, and wisdom meant in that era to follow the rules. To be wise at that time was to just be a good rule follower who did good. But when the exile came and the reworking of Israel's theology, they noticed that the righteous sometimes suffered, and evil people sometimes prospered. And they started thinking that someday in the great by and by, order would be restored. But in the meantime, wisdom was seen as that which would strengthen and guide those people who suffered unjustly. Wisdom reminded the faithful that one day the eternal purpose of God would be restored. And then, after the building of the temple, the theology shifted again. Now, both of the earlier theologies never went away. It just started getting added to. Those theologies haven't gone away yet. But eventually, they started thinking about the way everything in life is unpredictable. Sometimes the righteous prosper, sometimes the wicked prosper. Wisdom became the way we negotiate the ambiguities. And it gave birth to a whole bunch of literature in that era, and much of our Bible is dedicated to the wisdom literature. And Proverbs is a part of the wisdom literature in our scripture, and today's reading a part of that. And in today's reading, woman wisdom, Sophia, is setting a table. She is getting ready to throw a party. It's going to be a big feast. And to accommodate this many people, first she had to build a big house. 7 pillars for this house. Now, some think the 7 pillars were mentioned because that's the way the temple was supported and wanted to make that parallel. Some think 7 pillars just because they wanted to show that this was a really big house. It was so big it needed 7 pillars. Scholars can't agree on that. But she is preparing the biggest feast ever, and an open invitation calling out to the simple and the senseless. Her servant girls are sent to the highest place in the city to call out to everybody. Sophia is throwing a party. She wants everybody to come. Sophia is a friend to the poor and the simple, the rich and the educated. Everybody is welcome at the table that wisdom sets. You can come and eat the bread of her teaching, drink the wine of her insight. Lay aside all of your immaturity and feast right here at this table. At this table, you can learn to live and walk in the way of insight. This is the table where eulogy values are consumed, the table where maturity and judgment and perception and discernment are a part of the feast. And it just keeps coming and keeps coming because woman wisdom throws one heck of a party. By the way, we focused a lot today on children, but I hope adults have not given up the pursuit of wisdom. Negotiating adulthood without a keen attention to wisdom is a pretty perilous path. I mentioned that formal education doesn't give much attention to wisdom, but I have to back off of that a little bit. There is one notable exception. It's at graduation. Have you noticed that after years of cramming our heads full of algebraic formulas and memorizing the monarchs of England in order and all of that other stuff, the things we do to stack up the knowledge, we get to graduation, and that's when we're told we ought to do something good with all the smarts we got all the years before. So 16 years of building up resume virtues, followed by like a 14-minute appeal to do something good with it. That's kind of the balance. Almost all of it. I've got a few excerpts of graduation speeches. Listen to how they appeal for you to do good with your smarts. The first one of these is by Theodore Gazelle, Dr. Seuss. Lake Forest College, 1977, and this is the only one I can do in entirety because it's not even close to 14 minutes. My uncle ordered popovers from the restaurant's bill of fare, And when they were served, he regarded them with a penetrating stare. Then he spoke with words of wisdom as he sat there on that chair. To eat these things, said my uncle, you must exercise great care. You may swallow down what's solid, but you must spit out the air. And as you partake of the world's bill of fare, that's darn good advice to follow. Do a lot of spitting out the hot air and be careful what you swallow. Now that has something good to say about wisdom. Here's another excerpt from a commencement address, this one, Anne Lamott at UCal Berkeley in 2003. Just an excerpt. I got a lot of things that society had promised would make me whole and fulfilled. All the things that the culture tells you from preschool on will quiet the throbbing anxiety inside of you. Stature, the respect of colleagues, maybe even a kind of low-grade fame. The culture says these things will save you as long as you also manage to keep your weight down, but the culture lies. And education will not save us either. The culture lies. One of my favorite graduation speeches ever, I didn't get to hear, and I can't find in a transcript anywhere. But somebody who had been there reported it to me, so I'm probably going to botch it pretty bad, but I've got the gist of it. It was a graduation address given by Will Campbell, who died last year. Some of you will know that he's one of the characters that the cartoon Will Be Done is modeled after. But this is the graduation address he gave. He said that a college professor in the early days of computer science offered a new course. And it was going to be a course to use the computers to predict the end of the world. Students would put in all of the data they could find into the computer, and at the end of the class, he would have the calculation spit out when the world would end. All semester, big class, students were putting in polio vaccines and wars in Uganda, but they also put in medical advancements and technological improvements. They were putting bigotry and poverty, all of the things they could find data on, they were entering into the equation. At the end of the semester, when the professor called for the calculation, typed in the command, after some churning and spitting, the computer finally gave the prediction. The world as we know it will end in 5 years, 3 weeks, and 6 days. Well, what the professor couldn't foresee is the amount of panic that was going to create all over campus. And not just all over campus, it got word to the media, and soon people are writing newspaper articles about it, and people are being interviewed. Panic spread everywhere. Some people started to challenge the data and the outcomes, reminding people are really smart, you know. There's new research. There are new medicines that are now available in Europe that are not available here. I don't think everything has been put into the computer. So the professor offers the course again. This time, sign up was huge. They were meeting in multiple classes across the campus. All of these classes at the same time, loading in as much data as humanly possible. We're learning more about farming techniques. We'll put that in, put that in, put that in. I've read an article about new breakthroughs in heart disease. We'll get that, put that in, put that in. But all the while, others are loading data too. Increased incidents in hate crimes, governmental corruption, divorce rates higher. Boy gets beat up by high school classmates because he's gay. Greater percentage of children growing up in poverty. All of the data is going into the computer. Well, at the end of the course, when the calculations were ready to be made, no classroom could handle it. They had to meet in the college football stadium. They hooked the computer up to the big Jumbotron screen. The stadium is packed. You couldn't cut the anxiety with a knife. And when the professor typed in for the final computation, these words came across the screen. In light of new data, the world will not end in 5 years, 3 weeks, and 6 days. The world as we know it will end in 4 years, 2 months, and a day. The stadium goes nuts. Tears, panic. One crazed student jumps up onto the stage and starts typing himself. He frantically types in, "Is there anything we can do? Anything?" And the computer comes back with a simple reply, "No, all computations are correct." He keeps typing in, "Is there any hope? Is there any hope?" And the computer spits back this time, "Unto us a child is born. Unto us a son is given." At the heart of wisdom is knowing our limits, even the limits of education and intellect, because the ultimate hope of humanity is the heart of God. Let us stand and sing and respond to a love that big and say yes to what God is leading you to say yes to.